Hello everyone, welcome to a new Process Mining Café. This is the first Process Mining Café after this year's Process Mining Camp. But in fact, it's a little bit of a continuation of Process Mining Camp because we are joined today by one of the speakers who shared their experiences as Process Mining Camp, and that's Daniel Kaße. Hi Daniel.
Hi Anne.
And so Daniel, you told us about how to build trust in your organization. That was one of the main themes of your presentation, and that's what we want to talk more about today because it's such an important topic.
Yes, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So we're getting started very, very soon. I just want to make one comment before, for those of you who are tuning in for the first time. We're doing these cafe sessions live so that you also have the opportunity to share your own experiences. So if you have thoughts or have had experiences with how to build trust in your own organization, please let us know or ask questions to Daniel or myself. For this, you can just join the chat below the video where you are watching this right now. You don't need an account. You can just type your name or any name and you are in there, and we will keep an eye on the chat and bring up any comments that you make in the session. All right, so let's get started. So the whole overall topic that we chose is building trust in an organization, and anonymization was also one of the titles because anonymization is one of the ways how you can actually build trust or work with data in a way that makes people feel more comfortable. And actually in the second part, we want to also get a little bit more technical and a little bit more concrete about what this means and show some different forms of anonymization, and talk a little bit about the technical side of things. But before we do that, we want to talk about the organizational piece, which is, in my opinion, even more important. Let's first set a scene and talk about why it is even necessary to build trust. So why did you make this the focus of your presentation, Daniel? Let's start there.
Sure. So generally speaking, the problem with trust is the world gets more complex every day, and therefore it's harder to get a good overview, and you don't know who you can trust, and everything is connected, and even devices that are not necessarily needed to be connected, all for the sake of collecting and selling data. And while digitalization has such a great impact on the world, and it also leads to even more processed data. And for many people, it's kind of a black box, and it's easy to get lost in the sheer amount of data which is collected and processed. And when I talk to people, when I ask people if they really know who is processing their data and why, they kind of become thoughtful. And I guess everyone can relate to those annoying cookie banners. When you visit a website, you have those cookie banners up front, and do you know exactly who you are sharing your data with? So just a real life example. And once I'm at this point, when I talk to people, they suddenly try to reflect this on themselves. And then it starts to grow fears. So everything is, for people who are not familiar with this topic, kind of a black box. And so back to the general question, why is it necessary to build trust? Trust isn't something you can ask for, and it is not something you can buy. It is something you have to build to minimize those fears. And in an organization, there are many different stakeholders and interest groups with different fears to overcome. And this is even before we can start with our analysis. So back to the question, it's not specific to process mining itself. It's something more general, and people know that data is processed and it's used against them sometimes, and they are trying to comprehend what's going on and started to build a negative perception, and this is something you need to break up first.
I guess I'm asking because my experience is that it is maybe even more the case with process mining, that people are maybe hesitant because process mining makes everything so transparent, right? So if you see a process that's discovered just from data, and you see exactly what happened, in which order, and every timestamp, every activity is reflected in there. So it's really a reflection of the reality that people are not used to see on that level. So if you have data that's built to create some report or some KPIs or something, well, in theory, they're also measured, right? And sometimes they're measured quite harshly. If you're looking at, for example, call centers, how people in call centers are measured, that's really like down to the second, like, how many breaks they take and all of this. And
exactly.
But at the same time, so this kind of visual aspect and the realization, you can really see everything.
Yes. Yes, I completely agree. And when you listening to the news, you see some data breaches and everything is such a, like I said, a big black box. And if you are not familiar with this topic and don't exactly understand how things are connected to each other and how it works, then it brings fear to people. And they are trying to move it away from them and say, okay, this is not for us. We don't want this in our company. We don't want this as a social thing. And this is a fear you need to overcome at first, even before getting the data itself, even if you don't know what's exactly inside.
Okay, we had a little technical problem there. Sorry for that. So my question was, Daniel, so in your situation, I was curious, who were the people who had fears in your situation, and what were their concerns? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. Just as a pickup point from the camp, we had the 3 dragons, and they represented 3 organizational roles. And basically it comes down almost, in my case, it came down to these 3 stakeholders. And the first one was the process owner, of course, because the process owner is someone who is responsible for the data that is generated. Yeah. He or she is the one that needs to trust you because you see everything that's happening inside his or her department or in the process you want to analyze. And you see everything that happened in the past. We are analyzing data from months or years ago, and you can pinpoint some events at time long ago they might have already forgotten maybe. And that is the first person, the first stakeholder, of course, always the role of the process owner. And the process owner is the starting point for me. And if you want to analyze the data from a process where you have a distinct process owner, you have the responsibility to analyze this data with the powers you have, and you need to make sure that it benefits the process owner. So that is my starting point with the process owner. And if you don't have the agreement with the process owner, you having a bad time possibly, and maybe your whole process mining project might fail, because if you don't have the backup from the process owner, you would rely on a possibly very good documentation, which we all know processes are generally not that deeply documented up to the level where it comes to log data.
Yeah, that's a really important point, right? So it's you need their input to interpret the data. So you need that domain knowledge. You need that access to the domain knowledge, because unless you're the process owner yourself who's analyzing their own process, which some people do. So that's, I think, a very comfortable situation where you have all that domain knowledge and directly interpret everything. Then you don't have that gap. But in most situations, there's a certain gap. So you maybe know a little bit about the process, but you need someone. It doesn't have to be the process owner. It can be another subject matter expert from the department who knows the process, who helps you interpret things correctly. But what you said before is also, I think, the second dimension. And that's so important, is that, well, ultimately, they have to do something with this, right? So if they're not interested, they're just blocking it. You can analyze the process all you want, but what use would that have? So,
Exactly. I completely agree. So if you don't have the mandate to do what you want to do, it will fail. And so you need to get the process owner as a starting point on board and make him or her understand what you are doing and why you are doing it and what you can provide. And after all, he or she is responsible for this process, and it should be in his or her interest to enhance the process, to make it better, to make it more efficient. And once they understand how what process mining is capable of, they quickly start to realize that I'm only here trying to help and not to hurt them. And this is a good point. Yeah, and that's, I think, also in your camp presentation as well. I think you brought that across very nicely, that you managed to really bring them on board, also make them enthusiastic about about process mining, or make them see the value, what they can get out of it, right? So that was really a way to address that fear that you mentioned in the beginning. Yeah, and exactly from my other experiences, when I showcased this one specific project I made to other peers in my company, they are immediately on my side and say, I want this too. And so if you have one good managed project, one good managed process mining experience with someone who says, that was good, that helped me a lot, it gets more easy with every project.
I can imagine, yes. But maybe just a quick additional question. So in your case, the process owner also needed to give his or her approval to give you the data, or could you have gotten the data without them?
I got an example data set the other way around, and I then immediately started asking questions, of course, because the data itself was, in our case, not documented good enough. So we had some abbreviations which I was not familiar with. I had timestamps which were kind of the funny way, that not non-standardized timestamps, and I was not sure if it is a timestamp or it's Unix time or whatever. And so I needed the help from the process owner right away. And that was, in my case, the starting point. So I got a sample data set from a colleague and then immediately started talking to the process owner.
Okay, so that's the first stakeholder, the process owner, who had the fear of what would you do with those insights, and you brought him on board by doing it together with him and making him see the value.
Yes, totally. And we had so many talks. It was during COVID times, and we were all sitting at home, and I was like on the phone for 8 hours straight, and we were talking so much about how we can do this and that. And so this is a real life case after all. And so from my experience, it was kind of nice to build this together. It was it was not that time efficient as it might have, or if it could have been, but it was a really nice experience for both of us.
Okay. And then who's the second stakeholder?
Yes. And so the second group are so regulatory or legal reasons. So even if the process owner says, yes, sure, you can do this, you still have some stakeholders in a company, especially in the European Union. So in the European Union, we have a wonderful thing called GDPR, which is protecting personal data of so-called natural persons. And inside of my data set, there were different personal data set or data points. And for example, names and given names of our customers and names from our employees who were involved in this process.
Right.
Yes. So, and we had a special category of data as well, because health data is a specialized category. So I did not came around to involve our data protection officer. So that was my second stakeholder I involved for data privacy concerns. I consulted her and tried to explain what I'm going to do with the data. She did not really need to understand what exactly process mining is. She was only interested in what kind of personal data am I going to process, where do I process them, and how can I make sure that I am keeping the rights of the persons in every step in mind.
Right. Was she also interested in what you're doing with this data and why you need it, or was that not so relevant?
At the first point, she her concerns were more like, are we allowed legally? Are we legally
Which
allowed
data? Yeah,
to process this data for not the reasons which we are in possessing of the data? So we have this data, but can we facilitate? May we facilitate those data? And this was one of her main concerns. And we talked, and in the first place, we talked about maybe uploading the information to some kind of a database or a cloud service. And I was not sure how can I make process mining work with this data. And then we came across Disco, of course. That's the reason why we are sitting here. And what was really beneficial to the privacy officer was the data never gets out of our computers, our network.
Yeah.
So it's only processed locally, which was a big plus and a real benefit for her. So she was satisfied with it. So
I can imagine it's an important point for quite a few of our customers, because some of them analyze quite sensitive data. And like you were saying, in your situation, you're also working with health data, which has a...
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and that is a big plus. And so she, I guess it's not that important for a legal person to fully understand how process mining itself works, only provide the information on what types of data you are trying to process.
Before we go to the third person, I just wanted to ask once more. So for the privacy officer, so what you did there is you made a request. Did you do this right in the beginning of the project and waited for their okay, or so you got an approval from them to continue, or how did this work?
Yes, exactly. Okay. So I made an appointment and showcased on the example data set, or in my case, even with public data set, how it works in general. And then once she understood it, I wrote it down in an email and I wrote her down everything I want to do. And with her, I came to an agreement about deleting specific data, anonymizing special data. And I try to make her understand why I need specific data still inside of the data set, but I would not necessarily need it as clear data. So we talked about pseudonymization as well, and
we will come back to that a little more in the second part of the cafe. Okay, very good. So who was the third group of people having concerns in your case?
Yes. The third group, also a German thing, or maybe you find it across Europe, but especially in Germany and the northern countries, is a strong and long history of works councils, which can be found with a large tradition or with a long tradition back in the I've seen 1850s, and so it's deep in mind of the people and the workforce and the employee associations in different countries and in different areas are providing guidance for the employees with their different topics which they are involved in. And in our case, the Works Council was the third group of people who needed to understand how am I going to process the data and why, and what would I do with those informations from an organizational perspective.
So they really protect the rights of the employees, right? So that's their role in the company.
Yes, exactly. And their rights, which they are protecting, came down to some specific topics called monitoring of employees' behavior. So if you have the data, so you can imagine, you can trace back individual persons. And you can also possibly measure the performance of the employees, which is a huge topic. And those were the main concerns.
That should not happen, right? Measuring the performance of the employees is what they don't want to see.
Yes, exactly.
Maybe, so just a note on that. So it's true. I think there surely other countries and also European countries who have this, but I know also from Germany that it's quite strong there. So that's actually when we talk with new customers or people from Germany who are starting to work with process mining, I give this to him as a recommendation that they should involve the Works Council from the beginning, because actually there was one customer who had this issue. They didn't do this, so they handled everything very responsibly. They, even anonymized the data and did everything carefully, but they didn't tell the Works Council. And then somehow later they found out, and then they were so then it was really a problem. They had to stop everything and go through a new approval process, and it took like more than a year until they could continue, because they didn't bring them in from the beginning. So you did it definitely right to talk to them right from the start.
I can imagine that. It did luckily not happen, because I involved them, as you said, right from the beginning, and asked for their approval from the very start. And they have, in my case, they had a legal baseline on which they operate. And so they could pinpoint it to the exact two parts where my process mining project is affecting these rules. And I asked them beforehand, because they need to be involved when. 2 points. We want to introduce fundamentally new working methods. So process mining itself was new to us.
Yes.
They need to be involved to that. And afterwards, of course, when I had my analysis and want to enhance the process in different ways, that is the second one. We want to facilitate workflows. We want to make them better. We want to make them more efficient. And they need to be involved in that case as well. So 2 points: introduce new working methods and facilitate workflows. That were those 2 parts. And if I would have ignored this, they would most likely have stopped it, or would be at least very angry at me.
I can imagine, So thanks for sharing that. So we have these 3 groups of people, and so what I also like very much about your project is that you then also in the process of talking with all these people and addressing their concerns, that you took an extra step to formalize this a little bit, right? So we have actually one example in the community of this before. We will share this with the show notes when we release the recording. We had a Process Mining Café also once, and different blog articles and so with Leonard Studer from the city of Lausanne. And he was also always someone who was making the case that you have to put people at ease and bring them with you. And back in his project, he used or created something he called an ethical charter, which was specifically designed for the people working in the process, so the process owner maybe, or people working, process stakeholders, to build their trust so that they work with you. And so part of that is making clear what the goal is. So why are you doing this analysis, but also why are you not doing it, right? So there, for example, you could explicitly write in the purpose is not to measure the performance of individual employees, but what we want to do is to improve the overall process, just to give an example. And so, but that's kind of for this one group, more or less tailored. So I think in your case, you went a little bit further, right? I think the procedure that you wrote up as a more of a formalization, how to do this, it addresses concerns of all three groups. Or can you talk a little bit more about what you did there?
Sure. So basically, you're asking what are the steps to build trust, and when to involve who. Mm-hmm. And from my experience, like I said, start with the process owner, because he or she is likely in a high hierarchic position and should know who to involve above this. So if you don't by yourself already know, start with the process owner, and he or she will guide you and should ask the right persons. So this is one starting point. Yes. And if you feel confident, or if you already have some experience in your company, or if you have a good stakeholders with the stakeholders, if you have a good relationship with some of the stakeholders, you can parallel involve them as well. And at the very least, as a bare minimum, involve the data privacy officer, the Works Council. Mm-hmm. And additionally, maybe it cannot hurt if you want to install some new software, ask your IT department. So our IT department was happy when I told them I need to install Disco, and they said, okay, we can manage that. Thank you that you did not install it by yourself. So that was one way. And how to build trust, and how I have a phrase, I have a German phrase that I try to repeat to myself in everything when I try to explain something new to different people or stakeholders. It's called hol die Leute da ab, wo sie stehen, which basically means pick those people up where they stand right now with their existing knowledge and their point of view right now. If you are getting the information, and if you talk to them and you understand what are their concerns, what part did they not fully understand, you get a better idea on where you should improve, where you need to explain something a bit more. And just from my personal experience, some so-called W questions. So what is process mining? Mm-hmm. What are the benefits of it? And why aren't there any other ways to gather this process knowledge? Why do I need process mining in the first place? Why do I need the data at the first place? In the first place, aren't there any other ways around this to get those insights? So those were all questions which I was confronted with. Who is processing the data? Who is responsible for the ethical, like you said, anonymization of the process, and who is responsible for the concerns? And as a forward pointer, where do I limit myself deliberately, where I cannot trace back data, and where can I see what you are doing? Those were all questions that came up when I talked to the people. And if I sum it up, it all comes down to providing transparency. So transparency through the entire process of getting, preparing, and analyzing the data is one crucial point and one very important point in trying to building trust, so that people can understand what you are doing, why you are doing this. You can do this alone in a dark room, of course. But my guess is that you would not be that successful with this method.
Yes. But you did all that, but I think you went a step further because you also put it in writing, right? You made it like a little contract between, within your company, like what the purpose is and what the boundaries are. So tell us a little bit more about that.
So just as so we had a general agreement. So this is what you are asking, and we started with many manual steps, and we in the first place we involved a person of trust, a third party. So they call it segregation of duties, and that was kind of many manual steps, and we did not want to make this in the future. So we have we came together from the different stakeholders, especially from the Works Council, and we try to make a written guidelines how we may process data, how we may process log data, analyze data. And what we have is written down model or a written down role, which is for some people we have roles defined, which are coordinated with our HR department, where they are where it is described what those people may do. And on the other hand, we have this general agreement on how to process data itself. And those two combined lead to a general agreement how we can facilitate the data we are sitting on. And I guess you have something in the background.
Yes, I can't show it right now, but what we are going to do is we will share it. So that's the nice thing. So Daniel, you created this agreement, right? Or how I think you call it, agreement of the operational use of log data. So that's the English translation. Originally, that's a German agreement. We can share both the original German version as well as the English translation for you. And I think it's a very nice starting point to take, as you don't have to use it exactly in the same way, but it's a starting point for your own process mining project, where you can look through the elements that have been defined in there, like what the agreement was about, what aspects you have to think about, and then tailor it to the needs of your own organization and make sure that it fits how you're processing the data. And it's interesting, Daniel, what you're saying is that it was also a progression, like a process, right? Getting to that point that was a little bit at the end of your project, maybe, that you had this set up once you had a little bit maturity and went through a few iterations. But because in the beginning you said you had this kind of organizational way of separating. So I think it's clearer. We come back to this when we talk about the technical piece in a moment. So then in the end, having this agreement in place gave you the permission to do more things, because in the end people trusted you more because you had made this step to set up this agreement, right? So it's also, it has increased trust, I think.
Yeah, totally.
If I understand you correctly.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Okay. So I think this organizational dimension is so important, and that's definitely the starting point for everything. But we do want to spend a little bit of time also to talk a little bit more about technical things you can do, because sometimes technical things can support the building of trust. And so there you already mentioned one piece, Daniel, which is just removing information, right? So what did you have to remove, or what would you like to share about removing information?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in the data, in my data set, we had a lot of information that was not necessarily needed to make a good process mining project. And once I realized that it is not necessary to have this information, I completely deleted those information. So the first thing is, you can call it anonymization, but basically it's deleting everything you don't need for your project. So this was the first step, and this included, in my case, the names and the given names of our customers. So I did not need exactly to know who this step in the process affected, but I did not need it. So just need it.
So that's maybe just on the checklist of preparing your data, that should be on there for everyone, right? Just think about, don't just use all the information that you can get and you see what you do with it later, but be more deliberate about what you want to do with it. And then you also know what data you actually need, and the data that you don't need, you can remove it from the beginning. So then you don't have any problems with privacy or ethical problems with the data. If it's not in there, right, you can't do anything wrong with it. So that's the safest way, maybe, to just delete what you don't need.
Yeah, completely.
Yes,
completely agree. Yes. And on the other hand, I found data that would be still necessary, but not as clear data. So, for example, our employee data was still inside, but for process mining projects, it is a relevant information that a case was transferred from one to another person. So for my process mining project, it was not necessary to exactly know who this was. The information I needed was a process step was taking an information from A to B, but I don't need the clear name. So this leads to pseudonymization. And pseudonymization is altering the original data in a way that it cannot be calculated back without knowing the exact assignment rule. So I used the hash function for this.
So in the example of the employee names, when you anonymize, you could replace the name of the first person by name person number 1 or employee number 1. And the second person would be replaced by employee number 2, for example. But if you don't have the mapping between the original name and who's employee number 1, or the original name and who's the employee number 2, then you would call this anonymization. But if you have the mapping, so that you could actually trace back employee number 3, who was that later, so then that's a case of pseudonymization. Right? Would you agree, Daniel? So that's
yes, completely. Yeah.
It says, and so there's different ways to do this, but both of these actually, they preserve some information. This is what you also mentioned, because first of all, if the same person does something, it's still showing up as the same identifier. Exactly. For example, employee number 3. For example, you don't know anymore who it is. Yeah. But it's preserving that identity, and you do see like organizational patterns, like you mentioned. If a case is handled by just one person, or if there's a lot of handovers back and forth, so that's relevant information. You don't need to know who it is, but that kind of organizational behavior is relevant from a process analysis perspective. So that's what you're preserving by not deleting this information, but having it either anonymized or pseudonymized, right?
Yeah, exactly. And just to make an addition, it's to minimize. So my approach on using a hash function is to make it automatically. So you don't need to make sure, okay, Daniel is employee 1, Anne is employee 2. Here you don't have a rule table, so you can just rely on the cryptography from the hash function itself. So which is getting you consistent results, even if you apply this function again in the future again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's something you did that through KNIME, right?
Yeah, I used in the first step I used Python, which was the way we did before we had this general agreement, and the person of trust was adding a so-called salt to the cryptographic function. So we have the name, for example, Anne, and then the third person added a random string, which he or she would need to remember. But adding this string leads to an even stronger cryptographic function. And basically, it's the same as you do in generating passwords, which are as well not saved or should not be saved in clear text. So this was the first one, and we used Python for this. But after the agreement, the general agreement was signed, we shifted to KNIME, where I limit myself deliberately to fulfill these steps, even if I am having the original data.
Yes. So that's the point from before, right? So if I understand you correctly, before there was also this pseudonymization happening, but the mapping with the mapping from the original data to the pseudonymized data, that was held by a third person, another person, not yourself.
Yeah.
So you only received the result
exactly.
of the already pseudonymized data. But now, to make it more flexible and make it possible for you to work with new versions of the data, you could do yourself, and so then you also had access to actually the mapping.
Exactly, and that was the crucial part of gaining trust. So once we showcased, we were handling the data responsible. The general agreement came down to, okay, people who are in a specific role in the organization may access or should access this data, even if there is employee data inside, but they are responsible for deleting or anonymizing or pseudonymizing this data and do not perform any analysis on the original data. And this is the agreement, and that is what's written inside there. Whenever it is possible, you should fulfill or should make sure that no personal data is in clear view any longer.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
So, and that's the reason why I was able to shift to KNIME, and we don't need the many manual steps from the third party. And even it's completely valid, you can still use this. It's if your company is a bit shy or a bit too much concerned in the first place, that's not a problem, because you can start to build trust from there, like we did.
But it's not about the tool, right? The third person could also have used KNIME and given you the end result, and it would have been the same situation.
Yeah.
But so it's both also. Because, for those of you who don't know, KNIME is one of the ETL tools, so extract, transform, load, so essentially data transformation tools that is open source and available out there. And we sometimes see that people use that to prepare their process mining data in the right format. And that's one of the use cases here that Daniel is using it for, to pseudonymize specific data fields in the data. And you shared the specific function in KNIME, so we can also put that in the show notes for those of you who want to see specifically how it's done, and so you might repeat that. But what I wanted to add here is that if you don't need like an exact mapping, but you want to get the data anonymized, you can even do that with Disco. That's even easier because, and I will also share that in the show notes, it's in the user guide, well documented. You can, while exporting data in Disco, you can choose even different levels that you want to anonymize. So you can choose if you want to anonymize case IDs. Sometimes this is important because sometimes the case ID is, for example, if it's a customer name or some, maybe not a customer name, but an ID or maybe a legal case or some case ID that could be traced back to individuals, you might want to anonymize that. So for example, a good example is a social security number, right? So there are some government organizations who use the social security number of the person as the identifier, but you definitely don't want to have that in your data set, and you don't need it, right? It can be case 1, case 2, case 3. You just want to know it's different people, but you don't need to know their social security number. So you can choose just to identify anonymized case IDs, and then that's going to be replaced by case 1, case 2, case 3. And then you can import that anonymized data set again, and you work with anonymized data without without having to work with the original data. And you can do this also just for resources. So these are the employees typically. You can do it for timestamps even, so then the times are shifted. And that's maybe an interesting point because we also talked about that, right, Daniel? So it's also important not to be just too much relying on let's say the technical solution here. So I'm removing data, I'm anonymizing data, and so nothing can happen anymore. Be aware that there can be other ways through which people might be identified. So for example, if you remove the employee name, like Daniel did, it was the customer name, right? So you remove that. Yes. But if you have the customer ID, and you can access maybe an operational system with a specific customer ID, you can find back the name there, right? So that's something to keep in mind. And so especially if data is shared publicly, maybe outside of the organization, shifting timestamps can be a way also to obfuscate even more when something happened, to reduce this kind of recognizability. And so there are different options, and I will share that. But so.
Yeah, I completely agree on that point, and it is more like an ethical question, and you should always keep in mind when you want to make a successful process mining project, you should not abolish the trust levels you might have already achieved by being too greedy or to have included too much data, or to be lazy about anonymization, pseudonymization, and don't be too creative finding different ways that are not inside of the data. Focus on what you really need. That's a totally valid point. Yeah.
Yes, I agree, but at the same time, I think it's also a balance, right? So I think it's a good tool. For example, even if you don't need to, I think if you anonymize employee names in your data set, then the people who you're showing this to, they might feel less insecure, right? When for the first time they see a process map and you look at individual cases and they don't see their name there, so maybe they are less confronted in this way, like, oh, everything is transparent, everything is, in this very first contact with, when you are still building trust. So it can be a method of building trust, but at the same time, if you remove information or you anonymize information, you also lose a certain level of analyzability, right? So for example, if you do, anonymize case IDs, that's maybe an example I could give, then you also lose the possibility to make the link to the operational system, because you can't look up anymore a particular crazy case or a case that went really wrong from your process mining analysis. Ultimately, if you're talking about using process mining within a company, building this trust in the organization and maybe even being able to work openly with a limited but the real data in a small group might be even preferable to locking everything down, or but if you have the right culture and the right spirit, that's I think even more important. So but it's a little bit of a balance that you need to strike, I think.
Yeah, totally. Like always in life, even if an apple is healthy and 20 apples a day aren't healthy at all. So, it needs to be in balance, sure.
Yeah. So yeah, in your case, it worked out really well, right? So you could build up that trust with the process owner, and so got the okay from the other people who have their responsibility to make sure everything works correctly in the organization. But yeah, like you said, even other process owners, are they now approaching you and want to do projects with you?
Yes.
Or
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, that's really great. Yes, totally. Yeah, they are approaching me and asking. Yeah.
Is there anything we're forgetting? Some point you wanted to make, or something you wanted to? Yeah, what you find maybe most important about building trust?
I have some notes in front of me. So the topic is how to build trust and why is it necessary to build it inside of a company. And I just want to bring down in my perspective, crucial points to this question. In a world that has a growing complexity, and it's getting harder to get overviewed day by day. Mm-hmm. And so my personal points, which I want to point out as a closing, are: don't analyze without a concrete mandate.
Yeah.
Analyze only the minimum that helps to fulfill your mandate. Provide clarity to the relevant stakeholders that makes the process of getting and analyzing the data comprehensible. Define organizational roles in which the employees are allowed to operate. Mm-hmm. And as a final point, consider ethical questions depending on what data you analyze.
Yes, very good. That's a good checklist. So we can also put that in the notes, along with the document that Daniel shared with us, which I think is a really great starting point for all of you to look at this agreement. And so that's a way to formalize your own approach to work with data in a responsible way in the organization. So thanks a lot for sharing your experiences with the community, but by also going a step further and sharing explicitly, technically how you did it and those types of documents. I think it's very, very valuable for many people who are just starting out in this way.
Thank you very much. I'm glad that I could give something back to the community, and happy to provide such information.
Okay, that's great. So yeah, if you have questions about this or further thoughts, of course you can always contact Daniel or myself or us. And we will point you further, or we can work together. So yes, so thanks a lot to everyone for watching today, with tuning in for such an important topic, how to build trust in an organization. And we covered both the organizational side, but also talked how you can facilitate it a little bit more by technical means. And in fact, this was the last Process Mining Café before the summer break. We're having a summer break. We'll be back on 10th September. So in September, with a new Process Mining Café about clinical pathways. So we'll see you there. And again, thanks a lot, Daniel, for being here with us. It was a great session. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.